Hello, I'm Dave Nelson, and I'm a member of the Stoughton Sons of Norway Mant Lodge. I've been asked to talk about rumagrit today, and to do so, I want to start out by telling you that the translation of rumagrit is a sour cream porridge. Now, as we make rumagrit in the United States, especially in Stoughton, it oftentimes does not include sour cream, and we do not. But in Norway, it usually does. So, Pearl Alvakrog was a very fine cook at Sons of Norway. And she was usually the one who prepared the rumagrit. As she became older and it was more difficult for her to stand at a stove, she recruited a couple of us, one being Mike Miller, her nephew, and me, to be her rumagrit boys. So we were Pearl's rumagrit boys. Now, rumagrit is made by putting 2 quarts of whipping cream in a heavy aluminum pot and stirring. It's stirred for about 10 minutes to get it good and hot, and then 2 cups of flour are sifted in. A little sugar is added, pinch of salt, and with whisks we stir and stir and stir to make it as smooth and of the right consistency. Now, Pearl was very fussy, and she was very precise. She also checked her quality periodically by tasting it to be sure that it was the right flavor and the right consistency. And right consistency meant no lumps. So us rumagrit boys stirred and stirred until it was just the right consistency. Then we poured it into Neskos and went to the next batch. Now, after Pearl died, we took over the job of making rumagrit, but we needed more help, so we recruited a couple more guys for Pearl's rumagrit team. They included Rich Albright, Roger O'Dallin, Tom Chose, and we have been making rumagrit ever since. At Sittendamai, when we make the most, we make between 5 and 7 Neskos full of rumagrit, cool it and put it in the refrigerator because we make it on Friday, and then Saturday morning, thaw it out, get it heated up again, and serve it. And it usually is gone either by Saturday night or sometime the next morning. We always feel good when we're through because we know that there are a lot of Norwegian Americans and others who are looking forward to their rumagrit fix on Sittendamai.
Good morning. I'm Ann Nelson, and one of my projects for the day is to tell you about my favorite subject, rose malling. Now, I have to tell you that the man who came to Stoughton in the early 1900s was from Norway, and he had been a painter in Norway. His name was Per Lisna, and Per came to the United States, as I said, in the early 1900s. He was born in 1880 and he died in 1947. He was really well known in the Midwest, and he taught his daughter-in-law to Rosemont by guiding her hand for the strokes. And I should tell you a little statistic about him. At one point in his life, he painted 500 plates for Marshall Fields in Chicago. Now I'll tell you a little bit more about rosemalling itself. Rosemalling, the name rosemalling means paint, flower painting. Maling is painting in Norwegian. And I have to tell you that when it started, most of the rosemallers were men, because most of the men were farmers in Norway. And because they didn't have much to do in the winter, and Norway, you know, is a cold country, and so they had much snow. They were in their house and they painted churches, they painted ceilings, they painted rooms, they did everything. And then, usually by the next year, because the heat was not a kind of heat that we have today, it was probably coal or probably wood. They ended up having to paint all over because the rooms became so dark with the soot from the wood. And so then they kept painting, and they usually painted on a white background. Now I'm going to show you the first plate, and the first plate is the plate by Per Lisna, and he came from Lærdal, but he also painted in the style of Us. And as you can see, the leaves and the flowers are very distinctive. And we have a new Us pattern, and many rosemallers are painting that style. I do not paint that style. But it was very interesting because he painted plates and they look just like this, the 500 that he did for Marshall Fields. He also did other things. I've heard of him painting a doll cradle. I've heard of him painting trunks, obviously. But he really was known for these plates. Their main styles of rosemalling that are done in our area are telemark. Would you show the painting of the telemark? This is done by Vi Thody, and she also was a well-known rosemaller in the 80s and 90s, actually the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And her style, she taught everybody to paint Rogaland. Now, this style is not Rogaland. This style is telemark, where there's a C stroke. And that's how you can always tell telemark. Now, the grand dame of rosemalling around here really was Ethel Qualheim. Ethel Qualheim was really a born artist. And she grew up on a farm outside of town. And she painted scenery. And she finally realized who Per Lisny was. She took lessons from Per Lisny. And I don't remember any painting of hers that is done in the Us style as Per Lisny had done it. But she learned color and she learned placement of color, and she was known as the rosemaller in this area, probably most of the Midwest. She never gave lessons. Vi Thody gave lessons, and I was lucky enough to take from Vi Thody for 3 years, every Monday night from 7 to 10. And we learned so much. We painted in her basement, and when she was at the lake, we painted in a paint room that she had. Most of the colors that are most famous for background colors are blues, reds, blacks, greens, and I think they have done some browns, but most of them are the basic 5 colors. They don't have yellows as a background either. When a painter decides to paint, and I like to paint plates mostly, and I think it's the easiest to paint. I have a paint room in our home, and what you first do is you pick out the piece of wood you want. Then you figure on what style you'd like to paint. I learned on Rogaland. I'm constantly trying to learn more. I'm most comfortable with Rogaland because that's what Vi Thody taught us. And it was a good way to learn your colors and your balance of colors and how to load a brush. And then from there, we went to Telemark, and the least known is Hollandale. However, my husband's family is from Hollandale, and Hollandale looks easy, but it's very, very difficult. And I did not bring a sample of the Hollandale this today. Then they would like you to draw your own patterns. Now, most of us do not draw our own patterns, but they become our own patterns because we take a pattern that will fit that plate or the piece of furniture or whatever we want to paint. And then we find a pattern, but we always have to adjust the pattern to fit. And that's the things that you learn when you take lessons. The last class I just took 2 weeks ago was from the Vulders area, and I've wanted to learn that for a long time. And I really fell in love with that style. Now I must go home and paint in Vulders style so I don't forget it. And I am painting a plate right now, and I've had a pattern that the teacher brought to the class, and I'm doing a practice semi-small bowl, and I'm going to put it on a larger bowl that I brought to the class but did not paint. I took a few years off from painting. I just because I don't know why, but I took a few years off, and I ended up just starting at the Vulders. I wanted to learn this style, as I said. And so what happened is that I'm all excited about painting again, and I hope to paint some things for Christmas gifts, and I hope to use this style so that I get it implanted in my brain. Now, I can tell you that there are regions in Norway, and they're counties. I don't know exactly what they are called. We call them counties in the United States, but they are districts, I guess. That's what you would call them. And most of them have a different style painting, as does if you buy a bunad, which is the costume from that area, that will be different from the other areas. My costume that I have is from Bergen, and Bergen and Oslo have their own bunads. But because of that, I don't have a particular style. It's a Bergen. Now, a lot of people have styles, and the painting would coincide with their, if you look at their bunads, there are patterns in their bunads that you would see on plates or you'd see in the painting. The Hallingdal is you can see the same flowers in the Hallingdal bunad as you can see as you paint on your plate. Oh, the other thing that we do, we never use paint directly out of a tube. We usually have to mix our paints. And the colors we can use right out of the tube, obviously, is whites and black. But we always have to use until we get it to match the background a little bit. Green and red take on a much duller shade of paint, whereas a white or a black you could use a brighter shade. That's about all I'm going to tell you about rosemary, except that it is a fun hobby, and it is a hobby that I like to do. I don't do it as much as I did when our children were younger, when I could stay up late at night. I'm not as able to give long periods of time to my rosemary, but I do love it, and I'm happy I returned to it. Thank you for listening and watching.